first murder. And you had to be thinking, what was Eve thinking? She had two male sons, and she'd heard that promise in Genesis 3:15, where God said, "Hey, I'm going to give you someone who's going to crush the serpent's head." And then all of a sudden, her son is killed. Abel is killed, and Cain runs off. He's been sent away with a mark on his head. Well, then here comes Shem, and through this son is going to be the son of promise. And so now we have this. And so through him through Shem's heritage, we come to a guy named Noah. And so tonight, talk about Noah and the flood as we go forward. And tonight will be one of those times it's technical again, I'm sure, a little bit, but hopefully we can get going through this. Noah and the flood. All right. First one, this is something else we did talk about last week, and I wanted to speak about one more time, and that is believing enough. Is believing enough? And faith, and that was my definition kind of last time. Faith is having a strong conviction about a truth that leads to action. We have to be careful because we can have faith in the Word of God. And I mentioned this, I think, Sunday. You can have faith in that book and believe it from front to cut back to I believe the book, I believe everything about it. I have faith in that book. But if it's academic only, and it doesn't lead you to act upon your faith, to seek Jesus, to ask Him into your heart, to be saved, then your faith is just going to be stuck against a wall there. So faith is really, faith is your conviction, yes, but it's conviction in action. I'm going to act on my faith. So just believing is really not enough. So what can we learn about God in the story of Noah? What can we learn about God in the story of Noah? God requires righteousness. Don't you see that in the story of Noah? God requires righteousness. Righteousness is right living before God. God is loving, long-suffering, and compassionate. Can you guys see over there? God is loving, long-suffering, and He's compassionate. In the story of Noah, we read in the New Testament that Noah was a preacher of righteousness. It looks like it took about 120 years to complete the ark. And in that time, according to the New Testament, Noah was preaching, and so God was reaching out. He's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to Him in repentance. So God, through this time, the people chose not to believe what Noah was doing. Noah was definitely a man of faith. We know, according to the Word of God, it had never rained a drop yet. The ground, there was a mist upon the ground, the dew on the ground, but it had not actually rained. And we talked about that many believe in both the secular side and the creation side that there was a water vapor around the earth. And a water vapor that may have been an ice vapor, and that would have made the earth kind of like a hothouse. On a cloudy night, it'll be warmer, and on a clear night, it's cooler out. Same kind of thing. There possibly would have been seasons at that time, that sort of thing. So if we think about, they also would have made the world would have been that humidity, that tropical era to it, where there wouldn't have been a requirement for rain. Who knows? But that's what we're kind of thinking. God expects us to believe His Word and act on it like Noah did. God expects us to believe His Word and act on it. That's exactly what Noah did. He believed God. And then he didn't just believe Him, he went and did something with that belief. Okay, so why was God displeased with the world He had created? Why was He upset with the world He had created? Well, He saw that the hearts, that is really small, sorry. He saw that the hearts of mankind were continually evil. Every thought of their heart was only evil continually, the King James says. We think about God gave us that conscience to understand who He was. He reveals Himself through our conscience. We don't always follow our conscience for everything, though, unless it is bathed in the Word of God and prayer. The Bible says that the heart is desperately wicked, and who can know it? And so we need to be careful. And the world at this time had the thought of their heart was only evil continually. So, there is a way unto man in which He seemeth right unto man, but leads to death. And that's what we see had happened here with these people. The thoughts of the heart was only continued wickedness. There was when you think about wickedness, it says the world itself was corrupt. Man had become corrupt. Really what it talks about is lawlessness. And Jesus said that the days at the end of this age were going to be a lot like the days of Noah in that time of lawlessness. We're starting to see a whole lot of lawlessness in the land right now. This verse reminds us that sin begins in the thought life. It does begin in the thought life. That's what I talked about last time too. When we talked about sin, and sin has consequences. In 1 Corinthians 10:13, God always gives us that way out. That God will always give us a way out. And so, we think about this, the sin begins in the thought life. That's your first way out. When you consider that evil thought, that's with me. If you're living in the Word of God and you've given your life to Christ and you're abiding in Him, when that evil thought hits your mind, as a Christian, it convicts you, doesn't it? You're like, oh gosh, why am I even thinking that thought? God, forgive me of this, And that's the right response. That's what we should do, and that's doing the right thing there. But because if it begins in the thought life and we continue it and we act upon it, then it becomes sin, which can lead to death. So who was Noah? He was a godly man who found favor in the sight of God. God looked down and saw the wickedness, but then He found Noah, who found grace in the eyes of God, in the sight of God. Genesis 6:13, 7-9. What command did God give Noah? To build an ark. You don't have to don't write all this down. This is too much. To build an ark exactly as specified. Gather a male and female of each species of animal. Gather 7 of the clean. Gather his 3 sons and their wives, himself and his wife, and enter in the ark and wait. So we know Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And they had wives, and so together with his wife, Noah's wife, there will be 8 people on that ark, and that would be the 8 people that God chose to bring to be saved out of this whole earth. So Genesis 8:22, 9:13-17. What covenant did God make with Noah? That He would never again destroy the world by a flood, and a rainbow was given as a sign of that covenant. The next thing I have here, I just wrote this down. God was grieved about the evil in the world and planned to destroy every living thing with a flood. Noah built an ark according to God's directions and preached repentance for 120 years. Finally, Noah and his family, 8 people and 2 representatives of all land creatures, were saved during the flood. Noah then offered sacrifice to God. 1 year and 12 days passed. So, getting more into this idea, let's talk about the ark. I got a little model here of the ark. I keep in the office there, but we got so many pictures and diagrams of the ark, and it's a little bitty. It looks like a bathtub with a gazillion animals hanging out all the windows, and we bring up our children, showing them this little play ark. The only problem, we got to be careful, because sometimes we bring up our kids thinking that it is all a joke and it's a myth and it's a plaything. And I saved a note here. Answers in Genesis, which that's the shirt I'm wearing tonight, by the way. We used to live fairly close to that area, and we used to go up for a decent amount. They did a study this has just been a couple years ago, and they did a study, and there was lots of interesting things they found, but this was the one I found most interesting. 49%, they tested, this was all a survey done of 20-something-year-olds that were all raised in church. They had been raised their whole lives in church. That's who they submitted this survey to. And 49% of those raised in church, 20-somethings, 2 years ago, said the ark was a myth. They believed the ark was a myth. And they had problems with the whole creation story. And so that's scary. That is the part that worries me, concerns me. So I wanted to talk about this tonight, and hopefully you can take some of this and something that you'll be able to use in talking with others. So here we got, researchers indicate that less than 8,000 kinds of animals exist today. So less than 8,000. Now we know when Noah was told to go on the ark, he was to take these animals. God was going to direct these animals to him, but they were going to be after their kind. So take cattle after their kind. Take horses after their kind. So everything that you take would be after their kind. And so now a lot of this is not me. This is research. This is things that I found. You can go look at this up for yourself. The cubic space of the ark could hold 125,000 sheep. The reason I use sheep is because out of the animal creatures, the sheep is about the average size. If you took all the animals and from elephant down to the dog and whatever, the average would be about the average of a sheep. Honestly, it's way less than that, but we'll go with sheep. So the ark would hold about 125,000 sheep. And so with that in place, perhaps less than 60% of the space of the ark was used if we put that many on there. The very large animals, then we got to think about this. Why in the world would God take an adult-sized elephant on the ark? That would be ridiculous. Because part of the ark was to reseed the earth, to go forth, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Why would you want an old elephant ready to kick off to take on the ark with you? You take little young elephant. And so you want something that's, birth is a big part of this, so we want the young elephant that's going to live for years and years and years and produce many, many, many young. That's what we're looking for here. So why would he do that? On all of our pictures of the ark, we show these giant elephants on there. No, it would have been little fellers. And less waste product to clean up after, less to feed. There's lots of reasons why we would take young. Reproductive health is the main one, though, of course. Why we would take young specimens of all creatures. We would not want to take goat. And remember, God's in control of this. Noah isn't out going, I'll take you and you. God's leading the animals to him, the Bible says. So that's kind of the part of. Therefore, there was plenty of room available. If he didn't have to mess with the insects, there would have been room for them, as well as food for a year for everyone. So, I could go on and on about this, about what this really is about. In the Bible it says there's not cages on the ark. There's rooms on the ark. What's interesting about this time is, see, I said this little question I have. Also, the animals were. We think about they got to be in cages, and even at Answers in Genesis on the Ark exhibit, they show cages. I don't think that would be necessary, and a lot of creation people think that would not be necessary. And the Bible says specifically there's rooms on the Ark for the animals. Why would there just be rooms for these little fellows that are on there? Because every one of them are vegetarians. All animals are vegetarians in the beginning. They will be, according to our Bible, in the end too. But if you look at go to Genesis 1:29 and 30. 1:29 and 30, this is in the beginning. Let's see what God says here. And God said, in Genesis 1:29, and God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. He's talking to Adam here, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat, and it was so. They weren't meat eaters. Now we will see when now you can flip over here to the end of the story here in chapter 9. After the flood is over with, the boat lands, Noah gets off the boat, God makes a covenant, He gives him some rules and some things. And in verse 3, he says, Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. So he says there, that's when he's given the rule. Now you can start eating, you can start consuming meat. And up until this time, all the animals were vegetarians. All the animals were vegetarians. Look at this. That's a vegetarian. You say, oh man, a tiger eating grass? Are you kidding me? Do you know there's some tigers that are in captivity today that will not eat meat? They refuse to eat meat in some zoos, and they have to feed them fruit and veggies. But here's the thing. Now I have read where he'll eat ants and termites every now and then. But he's a vegetarian. And that there, Genesis 9, 1 through 3, is just where it talks about that. Every living thing. So look at this right here. Here's another one. Becoming a vegetarian is a big mistake. But there's a vegetarian, the Chinese water deer. That doesn't look like them. You ever think about the saber-toothed tiger with those big fangs? That's still living today, and all it does is eat veggies. But it looks pretty wicked. I'm glad our whitetails don't look like that. It might make hunting a new challenge. Yeah, so vegetarian, all of that is something we need to take into consideration. So you think about how do you house all the food? We had 60%, if they were the average size of a sheep, if that was the size. And keep in mind that this is, God took one, and over and over again he says, of every kind, of every kind. And we know kind, if you remember elementary science, you talked about philia and family, species, all those things, kingdoms it starts out with, you go down that list. This will be more related to family. So when he says of every kind, now what he's saying is you take 2 dogs. You don't take, there's around 400 purebred dogs today that we have. Those purebred dogs have only been brought about in the last 500 years. So we have, but really what they all come from is 2 dogs. And we know, secular science, Evolutionists will say the same thing if you ask them. We know that all dog species came from 2 dogs. What did Noah take on the ark? 2 dogs. He didn't take 500 dogs. He didn't take coyotes and wolves and foxes. He took 2 dog species, 2 dog kind. He took 2 horse kind on there, and we get the mules and whatever else that comes from it. Of course, that's hybrid, but zebra. But anyway, so that's what he's doing. So that's, that drastically reduces how many animals would have been on the ark. And then you think about they're all little ones. And it only makes sense. It absolutely makes no sense for them to bring full-size adult animals. That would just be ridiculous. So just lots of things to consider. And I hate, this is the other thing I have to do with this. That when you start thinking about this, I love the science behind this. And we could make this a huge study and just go on for weeks on just talking about evolution versus creation, because I love it. But I've got to sprinkle it with the fact that, remember this, it's God. It's God. And so, yes, he could do it. We think about Jonah and the fish. If we try to spend too much time saying, well, what kind of whale was it? You heard me say this last week. But, what kind of fish was it? Well, I don't know, a whale shark maybe, or, a humpback. It couldn't live in it. It's God. So you have to also, I believe that God spoke and it was, and he created all things. And so we don't believe that. And so also, anyways, let's go on to the next one. I believe this is personal, this is me, and I think a lot of creationists also believe the same thing. Everybody wants to know what happened to the dinosaurs. Personally, I think they were on the ark. They were on the ark, but I don't think that was on the ark. I think it was more something like that was on the ark. Yes. And so he brought the dinosaurs on the ark. I think that they were there. I think there's very credible evidence for dinosaurs being on the ark after the flood. And I believe honestly that if we look at the age of men, I believe in the young creation. If we look at the ages of Adam and it's all there. I mean, we can go through and look at the genealogies, count them out, look at it. And I believe the earth is around 6,400, 6,500 years old. And people say, well, it's got to be older than that. But can you, 1,000 years? I mean, seriously, you know how long 1,000 years, how many generations of people there is in just 1,000? But anyways, I believe they were on the ark. I believe they're there. We can talk about them all day long. Lizards, that's a big lizard. That's what it is. Lizards never stop growing. They're different than us. An alligator or crocodile will never stop growing until it dies. And so that's why we have crocodiles that are enormous in captivity. To this day, they never stop growing. They'll slow down in growth, but they never cease growing. And so if you took a lizard and put them in the perfect subtropical environment with all the food they can eat, and they would have been grass eaters before the flood, until after the flood they would have eaten grass as well. And so you think about, and the average dinosaur, by the way, is the size of a buffalo. We think of dinosaurs, they're all giant. Well, they weren't. Dinosaurs, on average, their size was the size of a little bit bigger than a buffalo. That's their normal adult size. Some of them were way bigger, like Brontosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Tyrannosaurus. Those were larger, but that's all we ever see because they're the cool ones, But anyways, and some of the thought process on this, I don't want to go too far off because I don't want to throw people, but almost every society, every civilization, every culture has dragon lore. They have stories they tell. This guy was a hero in our village because he defeated the dragon. There's so much dragon lore. It's all out there. Every culture has their own lore of these giant lizards, or these large lizards anyways. I think that after the flood, the tropical, if this ice shield around the earth was dissolved or gone, that which I believe might have been part of the windows of the heavens falling down. But anyways, then they wouldn't have got as big anymore. And I think that we would have killed them off. In Indiana, we had timber rattlers. I lived in the woods when I was a kid. Never come out of the woods, and I never ever saw one. I just heard we had them. Now the DNR up there is re-releasing them. I don't have any idea why. But I've said, there's a reason why they're gone. Yeah, they used to be in Indiana. So did wolves. But all the settlers that moved in didn't like to see their children killed, and so they killed every snake they saw and every wolf they saw, and like eating their livestock. And so they're gone for a reason, and I think the same thing happened with these. I think they're gone because man killed them off. But that's just my thoughts, and I don't get too far on that. But so while the ark was not designed for beauty or speed, its dimensions, there's lots of testing been done. They've tested this design here exactly. There were some Chinese students at a university that took this one out and tested theirs and did an actual ocean testing, a smaller version, of course. and couldn't destroy it. This one here, by the way, is built to the dimensions of the actual ark. If you go to the Ark, has anybody been there before? It is dumbfounding to walk up and see how big this thing is. This is a football field and a half long, and this front here, from the front up, is 10 stories. That's 10 stories tall on the front of that ship. It is just absolutely enormous. It's something to see. But anyway, so a cubit, we know, was from the elbow to the top of the middle finger on a man, an adult man. And I've said this last time, I'll keep saying it. My cubit, did you see the picture of me on Facebook with the buddy I met the other day that was 6'11"? His cubit's way different than mine. So we don't know how big Noah was. We don't know just how big he was. Roger's cubit, I guarantee you, is way bigger than mine. And so if we were measuring by cubits, and that's the way they laid it out, how big it was. They say the average was 18 inches. That's the one. There's also a royal cubit, which was actually, it's also called the Hebrew cubit, and that's 20.4 inches long. So what cubit did they use? I don't know. This is using the 18-inch cubit, and the ark's 450 feet long, 75 feet wide. That's 2 school buses wide and 45 foot tall. So there's your volume of the ark, 1.4 million cubic feet, a capacity of 522 railroad cars. And that could definitely hold 125,000 sheep, if that's the size we're looking at. 3 stories, each 15 foot tall. The deck. See, God gave us exact plans for this, just like we've talked about. I taught in Exodus on Wednesday nights. We look at the tabernacle. God was specific. He said, this is how it's to be built. Telling him to build out a gopher wood, use tar, and exactly the sizes and everything to do with it. God wanted it designed a certain way. Okay, so talking about the foundations of the deep. The foundations of the deep broke up. And this is one of the things that we look at. Most creation scientists believe that the fault lines that we see that run throughout the entire world fit the idea of the great foundations of the deep perfectly. Even if when you look at them, you would think something that burst out of the ground as described in the Bible would look like that, and that's the way they look. There's sub-cavernous cavities we see below. Some of them have been filled with lava as it's pushed up. Think about 1 cubic foot of stone weighs 102 pounds on average. If you think of that, and we think the great foundations of the deep, if they were 90 foot deep, you know how much pressure that is pushing down. When those burst, what would have came out? But anyways, this is what most people believe are the great foundations of the deep. It hadn't rained at all. It never rained. If these were to burst and blow out, wow, what would happen? And so anyways, also, while I'm here, let me interject and say that Pangea is a joke as well. Pangea, they try to show you in the Bible, in the science class, that all the continents just kind of fit together neatly. Well, they forget about there's thousands of miles of land underneath the ocean, deep trenches, mountains underneath the ocean. They don't fit together. They never did fit together. When they made that model, they had to reduce, Africa by 40%, Caden? And they had to do away with Australia and a couple others. To make that all fit, it's completely a farce. And but anyways, sometimes they think we're ignorant enough to believe some of this stuff. The alternative is they have to believe in God, and that's not something they would do, because this right here verse, see, 2 Peter 3:5-6. For this they willingly are ignorant of. That means dumb on purpose. They are dumb on purpose, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. They're willingly ignorant of the flood. That's what that verse tells us. And see, when you take evolutionary thought and you start at the wrong place and go forward, we've got some real smart scientists that don't want to live under God's rules. They don't want to live by a God. And so they've started in the wrong place. And they think that you can add millions of billions of years to anything and make it make sense. Because that's all you got to do. Is add millions of years to it, suddenly it'll work. But what they're doing is they're willingly ignorant of the flood. And we have so many mistakes because of this. See, here's one of them here. The fossil record, also built by man. Man just decided what this would be. And so we've decided if you dig down so far, well, there's the Mesozoic period, and there's where the Jurassic and the Cretaceous are at. And we've decided that if you were in that period, well, that's 145.5 to basically 200 million years ago. So if I dig down that deep and I get this deep and I find these kind of fossils, well, that must mean that they were in the Jurassic area. The only problem is that there's a gazillion problems wrong with this. We find trees growing straight up and down, petrified through all these layers in many places. And carbon dating is just, they pretty much, the scientists, true scientists have done away with this. It just doesn't work. Man put this together years ago and decided this is the way it is. There wasn't really much science behind this, it just looked cool. And so you look at the striations and the variations in the Grand Canyon, and you look at those and you go, that's 1 million, that's 2 million, that's 10 million, and that's what they did here. And they said, if we find these species, we know, well, this is 300 million years ago. And it's not okay. Created by man. This is in a textbook, middle school textbook. The fossil record is all the known fossils and their placements in the formation of rocks and positions in time. The fossil record is evidence of the evolution of plants and animals and their extinction. No, it's not. The fossil record was invented by man. Some dude just said in the 1800s, well, hey, this looks like a good way to do it. And they did it. They put a stamp on it and put it in all our textbooks. Just like they've done with the Big Bang Theory. And you heard me talk about that last week. Most secular scientists that have any intelligence at all, they will never use that as an argument because it is so ridiculous. And they know it is. And I can repeat it because I know it. I've seen it so many times. It's almost in every single science textbook where it will say, I think I said this last week, didn't I, about the matter. All the matter in the entire world, in every galaxy, every known galaxy, every unknown galaxy. That wall right there, me, that chair, everything was squished into a dot, that compressed into a dot that perhaps was no bigger than the period at the end of this page, is what it will say in the textbook. And it's really saying a period at the end of the page. And then it began to spin. So here's this dot that has everything in the world, our entire Earth, every planet squished into a dot. And we don't know why it squished into a dot. And then it began to spin, and then it blew up. That's honestly, that's Big Bang textbook. That's textbook Big Bang. And then that, we know is a mess because of the law of angular momentum and all that. Everything that's spinning, when it busts off, it'll continue to spin in that same direction. 2 of our planets are spinning the opposite direction of all the others. There's so many things wrong with Big Bang. It's just ridiculous. But to believe this, I have to believe in God. To me, this makes sense. There's a video there, but I'm not going to show it. We don't have time for it. This here I just want to put out just for people always ask too, where's the water? Where's the water for the flood? This is not a Christian site at all. This is USGS. This is United States Survey. So this is Geological Survey, USGS. And I just think this is really interesting is the other reason I put that. And I have the paper that tells you some more of the facts on this and a link to the site if you would like to have one. I got laying up here. But when I was in the water industry, I saw this one time. I was like, wow, that's really cool. So that big bubble right there, central United States, that represents all of the water in the entire world, period, every bit of it. That's all the water in all the oceans, underneath the ground, everything. That's what it takes. Doesn't seem real. So take that little globe that you see people set on their desk and you can spin it, and all that's really cool. And that holds a tablespoon of water, would fill that whole thing. It's all the water represented in a tablespoon. So this is crazy. Now think about this bubble. I'm telling you up there, the bubble itself, that globe of water is 35 miles high. So it is a big bubble, I will say that. And then if we look at there's a little one here over Kentucky. That little one represents all the fresh water in the world. So all the fresh water that we know, most of which is contained in glaciers, is right there in that. And then there's a speck down here, just a speck of water, and that represents the fresh water in lakes and rivers, all the known lakes and rivers on the planet Earth. That's not me, that's not creation, that's U.S. Geological Survey, that's their thing. And I've got the links to that to show you. So last year in Antarctica is massive, and it's virtually unexplored. And last year, close to one of our bases, there's a U.S. and Chinese, I believe, joint venture, which sounds crazy, but they not far from their base, they have found a lake, an underwater lake in Antarctica that's 12 cubic miles big. They know it's 12 cubic miles wide. They don't know how deep it is. It's 4 miles beneath Antarctica. So they don't know anything about it yet. We haven't explored it. I think, everybody says, where did the water go to flood the earth? It's right here. I think all the water that flooded this earth is still here on this earth. Here's the fact. If you smooth out all the earth's surface, there's enough water to submerge the entire earth 1.5 miles deep, the entire earth. So picture water world. Our world would be 1.5 miles underwater if you were to smooth out all the bumps. If you smooth out all the bumps, Where'd all the water go? It's still here. This is in Psalm 104. Who laid the foundations of the earth? Talking about God, that it should not be removed forever. Thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. They go up by the mountains. They go down by the valleys unto the place which thou hast founded for them. Thou hast set a bound that they may not pass over, that they turn not again. See, I think when the flood happened, and the video I had to show you was of Mount St. Helens. If you ever get time, go look at Mount St. Helens. When that exploded in 1980, there is so much evidence for creation. It's unbelievable. You talk about when there was a worldwide flood, it was cataclysmic to this world. It was absolutely cataclysmic. Mount St. Helens shows there was, in the video we see, when Mount St. Helens blew, it knocked out one side of the mountain. It was like 24 megaton bombs going off at once. It was had the power and the force of an atomic bomb. When it went off, it relocated Spirit Lake, which sits below it, filled it with trees. Every tree was flattened. 100-year-old trees. Blew them, root walled, everything, just flattened them out. It's really cool if you go and look at this. But on the side of that mountain, coming down the side of that mountain at 90 mile an hour was everything that was on top of the mountain. And what we see is it rooted out. It turned into a mudslide and rooted out Spirit Lake. And it dug a trench, it dug a canyon that is comparable to the Grand Canyon. Not near as big, it's a lot much smaller scale, but it happened in minutes. And we've seen that within 5 hours after this, there was a subsequent mudslides that happened. And in those mudslides, mudslide gathers rock, it gathers other material, becomes like sandpaper. And that in one of those subsequent mudslides that we witnessed, because this happened in 1980, it ate through 100 foot of rock. And see, it developed a canyon. Now, after that was done, and you can go watch these videos, and I had the link there behind this, wherever it's at. Well, where'd I go? Okay. And I can get there, but it's really easy to find. You can just look at Mount St. Helens, there's tons of stuff on it. But anyways, in the middle of this canyon, where it ate through the rock in 5 hours' time, here it sits today, there's this giant canyon, and there's a river running through the middle of it. And see, science would look at that river and go, you know what, over millions and millions of years, that river has finally ate down through all that rock and made that canyon. Isn't that neat? Because that's what we say about the Grand Canyon. Most people believe the Grand Canyon was washed out in a short amount of time during the flood. Or post-flood, maybe a dam formed and post-flood washed the Grand Canyon. Anyways, there's so much evidence for creation. So much evidence for creation. It is unbelievable. Yeah, look at Mount St. Helens if you ever get a chance. This here, Jenny used to live in Poplar Bluff, and so when we were first married, her parents lived in Poplar Bluff, and we come down to visit her parents. When I was down visiting one time in 2001, we were visiting her parents. This came out in the Poplar Bluff newspaper that her dad gets. And I found this article, and I sent it to a friend of mine who does creation seminars all over the nation, and he uses it in his seminar still to this day. And which is pretty cool. But these oysters, these are giant oysters. Some of these weigh, I think, what's it say? 660 pounds. Some of those are oysters. Giant fossilized oysters, right? There's more than 500 of them been found. The thing is, they're 2 miles above sea level on the top of the Andes Mountains. That's where these were found at. They found 500 of them, giant oysters. Now, I don't know if you know much about oysters. They don't move real fast. They're not real smart. How in the world did these giant oysters get on the top of the Andes Mountains? Well, get this. This is what I love to see. Yeah, some of them are 11.5 feet wide. It says, this reinforces the scientific theory that 200 million years ago, the Andes Mountains were covered by the sea. What? When did they say that? 200 million years ago, the Andes Mountains were underwater. No, about 4,000 years ago, there was this great big flood. That is what I think happened. But anyways, I think that's very cool. And this here has just been found a few years back. It's a mummified dinosaur. It's almost perfectly preserved, as the article says. By the way, this comes from Discovery. They are not fans of the Bible at all, even though they put out things every now and then that talk about who was Jesus. That's not because they really think that Jesus was a great guy or that he was who he says he was. This is from Discovery, but yeah, you can go on and find there's tons of articles on the mummified. It's in Canada, I believe now. And it's got soft tissue. They found soft tissue. There's another, I've got the article here. This is this is different than the latest one they found was soft tissue. T-Rex, they found blood vessels in it. The doctor, she's a paleontologist, she went in, did the study, and she said, oh my gosh, this looks like blood. It's got blood vessels, red blood cells still in it. Now, how does it's supposed to be 200 million years old. How does a 200 million year old dinosaur still have red blood cells in it? You can go find that. It's easy to find. I've probably got it. I just looked at it, just didn't add it here. You see here, this paleobiologist was shocked by the quality of the specimen in such good shape. He said it looks like it might have been walking around a couple of weeks ago. I've never seen anything like this. This is that one that's, have you seen that one that's barbed? It's got like the horns sticking out the side. They're kind of flat looking. It has a great big ball on the end of its tail. That's what that dinosaur is. Did not find this in the ice. Wasn't in a glacier. Nothing like that. You know, and there's been so many of these found now. Like they're finding the blood and all of them. They're like, what is going on? Well, perhaps they're not as old as you thought they were. Now, again, I'm saying they died, that we haven't seen them in years and years and years. But I'm just saying that if it was 200 million years old, would there really be blood vessels and blood specimens inside these animals? Now, I think they could be still thousands of years old, because that's what the science says. They could be a few thousand years old and still have this in them, but not millions of years. And that's the evolutionist saying that, not creationist. This is the guy that we all follow, we all think is so great. And I wonder why we don't talk about this. See, in today's racist society, we're a society that we're burning down monuments, burning stuff, and everything is so ugly out there. This guy here, Mr. Darwin, we still have statues everywhere. It's in every textbook, in every school, in every grade. We worship his theory of evolution because that gets me away from having to believe in God, of course. And he is the biggest bigot and racist proponent of racism there's ever been. And we just think he's great. You see that this is hard to find. If you start looking for it, it takes a little bit to find the true cover of his original book, which is The Origin of Species. The true name of his book, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. He says in that book right there, he says that the Negro will eventually be done away with. As we become greater and greater as humans, we will eventually do away with the lesser races such as the Negro. And he says that several times. Huge racist, yet we still worship him in all of our textbooks. We still think his theories are great because they don't have anything to fill in. This is the best theory they've got. And they'd rather have that than to believe in God, who believes there's only one race and one blood. And yes, I could go on. So events of the flood, that is really just to show you that timeline, to let you know they were in that ark for over a year. They were in the ark for over a year, 377 days, most believe. You can read through because it talks specifically about the events and as they happen. The rain begins to fall and the fountains of the great deep burst open. I do want to say at the beginning, when Noah enters the ark, God's the one that shut the door. Noah didn't shut that door. That's often looked over. The rain stopped, the floodwaters continue to rise, the Bible says. This is all just straight out of the Word. The ark touches the ground on high mountains, the water stops rising. It settles at about 15 cubits. That's like 23 feet, I think. The ark settles on dry ground and Noah waits. Then he sends out the raven and it never comes back. The ravens are contrary. And I don't know if it just flew around or something happened. But anyways, then he sends out his dove and it comes back, brings that olive leaf back. Then he sends out the dove again and it doesn't return. And Noah continues to wait. So he sent out the dove 3 times. I forgot one up there. He sent out the dove, it came back, and he sent it out again, it came back to the olive leaf. Then he sends it out again, and it finds rest for the sole of its foot somewhere. And the water recedes, Noah sees dry land, continues to wait. Finally, Noah and the animals leave the ark. Total days, 377. That I just threw in, that's where scientists, this is the guy that found the Titanic. He used that same technology and found a seashore that was, underneath the Black Sea, 550 feet below the Black Sea. I did a special on that. So why should we believe that the story of Noah is true? That's one of those. Well, the extensive details given in Genesis is the first one on that sheet. Extensive details given in Genesis. The second reason this is my big one, because Jesus' references to the event. Jesus talks about Noah quite a bit. And my thought is, if Jesus says it was true, it's true, and so that's enough for me right there. The other Bible's authors' references to the event. The fossil record does speak of this. When you look at the fossil record correctly, we can see that the fossil record could work if it's looked at in the right way. If you look at and believe in the flood and not billions of years. The existence of many ancient stories related to a flood. What do we learn about God? This is the one I went over already. I went over this. God requires righteousness. God's concerned with right and wrong. And He will punish evil. We see that the flood was a clear example of that. As the people grew so wicked, eventually, after the warnings, God destroyed the earth with a flood. So that first one on what do we learn about God would be, God requires righteousness. God is loving and compassionate. God is loving and compassionate. We see that in how He took care of Noah too. How He preserved Noah and his family and the love that He showed for him. And the love and the compassion He showed for the people, even though they were living in wickedness, He extended grace to them through the preaching of righteousness through Noah. So God was loving and compassionate. He is loving and compassionate. We see that in the story of Noah. So God did not want him to die in a flood. That's just what I just said, and I forgot a little bit of it. God expects us to believe. And He didn't leave us without evidence to believe it. He didn't leave us without the conscience, the heart. He didn't leave us without the example of general revelation, the creation that He's left for us. He didn't leave us without the bow in the sky as His covenant promise. Hebrews 11:7 says, even though it must have been difficult, Noah did believe, and it became his righteousness, is what that verse is saying. Noah did believe, and it became his righteousness. Noah put his faith to action. And we get the Noahic covenant in the end. Covenant means it's me. I'm the one making the promise. So in a covenant, it's almost different, because a promise, when I promise with somebody, I'm like, do you promise? I promise if you promise. That's just the way it works. But in a covenant, I'm saying, I'm going to promise. So maybe you'll enter, maybe you'll promise with me, but I'm going to promise. So when God makes a covenant, He's promising Himself, I will do this thing. And so He holds Himself accountable to the promise that He's made, whether you do or not. He says, I'm not going to do it. And so this is where He gives us, that's where I showed you earlier, where we can start eating meat and that sort of thing. He also says, I'm not going to destroy the world anymore. That's in Genesis 9. I'm not going to destroy the world with water anymore because of man. He said, men are still going to be evil. They're still going to do these things, but I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not going to destroy it with water. And that's the Noahic covenant. This is just 3 slides real quick here, if I can do this. So the dispersion, in the dispersion, that basically we can look and see. So from Shem, Ham, and Japheth, that's Noah's 3 sons. From them we can see who the families of God became. We know there's one little story that I must share, I guess, about when Noah gets off the ark. He starts a vineyard and he has wine and he gets drunk, and it says that he goes in and lays down, and his one son Ham sees his nakedness, looks upon his nakedness. Now, if you look in the Bible in other places, we get a little more definition about what that means. According to other places in the Bible, it may have been more than he just went in and went, "Whoa, Dad's naked." It was more of you think about David when his son tried to take over the throne, or the suggestion by one of his advisors was go up on the roof, put the harem on the roof of all of David's wives and go up there and lie with them, because that will show you've taken over. You're the man of the house now, and you've actually took his wives from him. Well, that's looking upon nakedness. That's the way it's spoken of later in the Bible. So it could be that Ham went in and tried to lie with Noah's wife. I don't know, but that's what it looks like. Whether it's that or whether he came in and just saw Dad laying there, we don't know for sure. But I do know that the 2 brothers, they backed in backwards. So we do know he was naked. They backed in backwards with the garment and laid it over top of Dad. But really, he hammered him with a really bad curse after this. So that's why people lean toward the later definitions of that he was trying to basically take over. He was trying to become the boss and take over the family. But it may have just been that he saw his nakedness and didn't use that humility that he should have done, and etiquette like he should have, and maybe he laughed, maybe he joked, we just don't know. But what he did was Noah cursed, not Ham. He cursed Ham's son to be, and the son was Ham's son named Canaan. and Canaan would become cursed. And so we look, and that is who Ham has a son named Canaan, who once he moves and takes over this place called Canaan, which is the promised land, all of the people of that land of Canaan are very bad. We know, looking at the Bible, they became very evil. And they became a bad person. And basically, Noah says, your brothers are going to rule over you. Their grandsons, their sons will rule over your sons, and this is what's going to happen. And it all started because of that little event there. And I have a paper here, and I went over it this morning because I was doing better on time, I guess. But this talks about the 16 sons. I have a copy up here you can take with you if you want. It talks about the 16 sons grandsons of Noah. The 16 grandsons of Noah and where they went and what they did. The Bible tells us who they are. And so we can look in the Bible and see. And some of it's very interesting. The sons of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. And we know, looking at history, and I'm not just talking Bible history, we look at history, ancient world history. And Aram, he took over, Aram went to the land along the coast north of Israel, and it's known as Syria. The Hebrew word for Aram. Aram's descendants spoke Aramaic, a language known throughout the world and spoken by Jesus Christ later on. We look, and you can look through and see. We know Canaan. We know where he went. This, where he went to. We see where all the sons of Noah, the grandsons of Noah, ended up. And it's very interesting. One of those grandsons' name was Nimrod. Nimrod was a great hunter before the Lord. It looks like he was a hunter of men, so he was probably wicked. And we know that. Do I have anything there? I'm not even clicking these. Yes, those questions. So basically, Nimrod, we know he became a great hunter, a great leader of men. What did God tell him to do after they got off the ark? Go forth and multiply, be fruitful. Fill the earth is what he tells them. And we know what happened is all the people, as they began to grow, they went to one place. They did not scatter, they did not disperse, and they started to build. We know under Nimrod's authority, and they started to build this great tower. But we think it was a step tower. It would have been a ziggurat. That's that thing that goes like this. We see them, and it would have done the same thing on the other side. So, anyways, a ziggurat is what I believe was built. When we see this, what happens is what really was the sin there? Well, if you read about it, they were really trying to make a name for themselves. They said that, let us make a name for ourselves. Well, if they're trying to make a name for themselves, they're trying to make a god of themselves and for themselves. They're trying to do what Satan did. And so in doing this, they did not disperse and multiply and fill the earth as God had asked them to do. And so God comes down. We see the Trinity, and as I read last time, let us go down and look upon men. And they go down and they say, look, there's nothing they'll be able to keep them back. They all have one language. There's nothing going to hold them back if we don't do this thing. Some people look at that and go, man, that means if we all had one language, we could just do it all. And anyways, I don't know what that verse is. It's in chapter 11. But if we don't confound their language, it says nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. That sounds like, boy, they could really be something. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they will have imagined to do. I believe that's talking about sin. That's not talking about they can just get the world by the tail. They're going to do great things. And let's go scatter them before they learn these great things. No, it meant they were going to fall back into the sin of wickedness, the same way as the world before the flood. That's why God dispersed them. We learn things through trial. We learn things as we go. These guys, he said, so this is why God really did that to them. He dispersed them because originally it was what they were told to do, and they were trying to make a name for themselves. The wickedness was going to happen. God dispersed them. God's command to mankind, be fruitful and multiply, fill and spread out all over the earth. What is the origin of all nations on earth? What is the origin of all nations on earth? I'm sorry, I'm going over. That's why I'm trying to go fast here. I didn't realize. The origin of all nations on earth is Shem, Ham, and Japheth. We should be able to look back genetically today, swab the inside of your cheek, figure out who you are. Eventually it's going to go back to one of these three guys. It looks like that's where you're going to come from. And God dispersed people into all the nations. And what we'll see happen is when that took place, God dispersed the people. Can you imagine if there was 100 people in this room, or even this room what we have here right now, and just every 3 of you or 2 of you all knew the same language and the other ones did not? who would you most likely sit beside tonight? You know, who are you going to be around? If I literally cannot understand your language, we're probably not going to hang out. I'd love to, but we're not. And so people, when God changed their tongue, changed their language, those people groups separated themselves and they took off. We see it's called the Tower of Babel, right? Babel means, literally the interpretation of that is blah, blah, blah. That's really the interpretation. We get the word barbarian from that. And but they dispersed into all these places, and then they took off, and this is how God took care of the problem. And so when these people groups went to all across the world and scattered, and I have a map on your table that shows you that. That's the dispersion, the descendants of Japheth, the descendants of Ham, the descendants of Shem, as they took off. What you'll see too, what I love, is that you'll see those names. The names of the grandchildren are represented in each of those places, a lot of them. Still name that, many of them today. But when they took off and left, these people groups, well, you know your family has certain characteristics. if there was a bunch of redheads in this family and they start having children, the chances are you're going to have more redheads. It's just going to happen. You start to take on each other's characteristics. And we see over the years that's what has happened as these people groups went out into the world and spread out and settled and began to live and intermarry with one another. Characteristics began to look a lot alike. And this is how we get the races, I believe, today, the races we have. But all those races came from those three guys, like their family, as they spread out in their lives. But that map helps kind of look at some of that. I know I'm going fast now. What were two wrongs committed by the descendants of Noah? They settled all together near Babylon rather than spreading out. I kind of should have done been going through this. They tried to build the Tower of Babel to reach the heavens. What did God do in response? He confused their language, which caused them to spread out all over the world. You know what would happen too if this group of people right here, the grandsons, grew up with Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Grandpa Noah, those 16 sons, and the people below them? You know what they would have heard is they would have heard the stories of the flood. There would have been still evidence, I'm sure, of a world that's pretty tore up. With the grandsons at least. The world would have been growing back. Look at Mount St. Helens today. They said the ground would be sterile. It just killed everything. But if you look on video today, I watched some today, I looked at it, and it's vibrant, growing back. It's just unbelievable that, the growth is there and it looks like a forest again. And of course there's dead trees laying everywhere that were knocked down by that original blast. But they would have seen things. You know what they would have done? They would have taken their stories probably with them. Did you know today there's over 300 flood stories across the world? 300 different flood stories. Now they're different. Gilgamesh is a very popular one in Britain. But these people groups, when they dispersed, don't you think they would have took their history with them? At Babel we see evidence of astrology, people that looked at the stars to try to learn about the gods and these sort of things. We see astrology in all these places. We see a ziggurat being built all over the place from that time, that era. There's ziggurats they're down in South America. There's ziggurats, just all over. We see them, and so these people took their heritage, what they knew, what they learned, and they scattered. But these are things that we would think you would see in people groups, is they would have these flood stories, and they do. Very neat, very awesome. All right, and that's just the map that I put out there for them. Like I said, and I have some papers up here that talk about that bubble on the map. If you want to go to the website for that on USGS, I got that up here, and then this other thing about the 16 grandsons of Noah as they dispersed and the places they went. It's kind of interesting to read too. I've got that up here a few minutes. So, all right, that's what I got for you guys. Sorry I didn't go over tonight. Talk too much. About 10 minutes over. Thank you for coming.